The bass throbbed through Glastonbury Tor, a relentless pulse that vibrated even the ancient stones. Colored lasers painted swirling patterns across the faces of the crowd, a kaleidoscope of youthful energy fueled by, well, Dick Spanner didn't even want to think about what fueled it. He adjusted his trench coat, the flickering lights reflecting off his polished chrome face, and winced internally. Raves weren't exactly his scene, more suited to smoky backrooms and a game of chess. Are you sure this is a good lead? Pat Dick's voice, a carefully modulated monotone, cut through the din. Beside him, Postman Pat, his red van gleaming under the neon glow, looked uncharacteristically grim. I delivered a package to Bethany Thorne's house just yesterday. Dick, her father, Lord Thorne, practically accosted me, said she hadn't been home for hours. Now, he swallowed hard. They found her body this morning, right here. Pat gestured towards a cleared space near the sound stage, cordoned off with police tape. The scene was crawling with uniformed officers, flashing blue lights adding to the already chaotic atmosphere. Lord Thorne, sounds like a client with deep pockets, Dick observed dryly. Or at least, the potential for deep pockets. Let's hope he's actually willing to pay. Rent's due, and Mrs. Miggins is threatening to replace my oil bath with a bucket of cold water. Pat sighed. This isn't about money, Dick. A young girl is dead. Lord Thorne is distraught. He wants answers, and he thinks someone local might be able to find things the police can't. Someone local, Dick repeated, arching a metallic eyebrow. You mean someone with a male root and a penchant for meddling and a robotic private detective? Pat countered, his smile faint. Look, Dick, you're the best around, and you know Somerset better than anyone. Please, Dick considered. He'd worked with Pat before. The postman's knack for being in the right place at the right time, coupled with his genuinely good heart, often proved surprisingly effective. Besides, the alternative was filing paperwork, and Dick would rather face a drugged-up zombie horde than fill out Form 37B. All right, Pat, you've twisted my circuits, but you're buying the oil bath. The next morning, the relentless beat of the previous night had been replaced by a hushed, somber atmosphere. The news had spread like wildfire. Bethany Thorne, daughter of Lord Thorne of Thorne Manor, found dead at the Glastonbury rave. Pat drove Dick up to Thorne Manor in his van, the red paint a stark contrast to the imposing grey stone. A black Mercedes blocked the driveway. Let's hope they haven't hired a fancy London detective, Dick muttered, hopping out of the van with a metallic clunk. Lord Thorne, a man weathered and etched with grief, greeted them at the door. His hand, when he shook Dick's, was surprisingly strong. Mr. Spanner, I understand you come highly recommended by Mr. Clifton, he said, his voice strained. I need to know what happened to my daughter. The police, they are going through the motions, but they don't understand. They don't know Bethany. Tell me about Bethany, Dick requested, his optical sensors recording every detail of the man's face, his clothes, his surroundings. As Lord Thorne talked, a picture began to emerge. A bright, talented girl, recently withdrawn, caught up in a group of wealthy, privileged teenagers. They called themselves the AVALON Collective, and they held their own exclusive parties and gatherings. She became distant, Lord Thorne confessed. She wouldn't talk to me. I tried to reach out, but he trailed off, his voice thick with pain. Davenport, the ever-optimistic border collie, trotted into the room, wagging his tail furiously. Terrible business. Terribly sad. But we'll get to the bottom of it, won't we? We always do. Sniff out the truth. That's what we're here for. Lord Thorne looked at the dog with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. You brought a dog. Pat cleared his throat. Davenport is exceptionally good at finding things. Dick resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Davenport, while enthusiastic, was more likely to sniff out a dropped sausage than a crucial clue. They spent the afternoon interviewing Bethany's friends, starting with her boyfriend, Spencer. He was a pale, skinny boy with vacant eyes. He claimed he'd been with Bethany at the rave, but they'd argued, and she'd stormed off. He hadn't seen her since. Spencer's brother, Michael, he died a few years ago. Pat whispered to Dick as they left the Thorne Manor. AIDS. It hit Spencer hard. Dick filed the information away. A potential motive. Perhaps resentment, anger. That evening, Sam, the resourceful fireman Sam from Pontypandy, met Dick and Pat at the base of Glastonbury Tor. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape. I managed to talk to a few kids who were on duty at the rave, Sam said, his face etched with concern. They saw Bethany arguing with someone, but they couldn't make out who it was in the crowd. They did mention something about the Avalon Collective and a rumor about an initiation ceremony. Initiation ceremony, Dick repeated, his internal processors whirring. Sounds like something Mr. Toad would be interested in. Mr. Toad, the flamboyant and somewhat eccentric owner of Toad Hall, joined them, dressed in his usual tweed suit and driving gloves. Initiations. Ah, the folly of youth. But sometimes, my dear friends, beneath the drunken revelry lies something darker. Toad revealed that he had, in his younger days, been briefly acquainted with several members of the Thorn family. He knew of skeletons in their closets, secrets whispered in hushed tones. One such secret revolved around the Thorn family's long history of involvement with the occult, a tradition that some believed was still practiced in secret. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden shout. A small fire had broken out on the side of the Tor. Sam, ever the professional, quickly assessed the situation. It was small, contained, but suspicious. Someone deliberately tried to start this, he declared, extinguishing the flames with practiced ease. And they used accelerant. Dick examined the charred remains. Another piece of the puzzle, he murmured. And it's getting darker by the minute. The next day, Dick took a trip to Burnham-on-Sea to enlist the help of Portland Bill, the stoic lighthouse keeper. Bill, a man of few words and keen observation, had a unique perspective on the coastal community. Young people today, Bill grumbled, polishing the lens of his lighthouse. They're all caught up in their own little worlds. Too much time on those blinking screens. Dick explained the case to Bill, focusing on the Avalon Collective and their potential connection to Bethany's death. Bill pondered for a moment. I overhear things on the radio. Fishermen talking. Coast guards gossiping. There's been talk of unusual activity out on the islands in the estuary. Late night boat trips. Strange lights. Dick's gears whirred. The islands that could be a location for their initiation ceremony back in Glastonbury. Dick gathered the team at his office. A cramped, cluttered space above a bakery, smelling perpetually of baking bread. He laid out the evidence. The fragmented pieces of the puzzle. Bethany's withdrawal. The Avalon Collective. The initiation ceremony. The fire on the Tor. The unusual activity on the islands. We're dealing with a tight-knit group of wealthy kids, hiding something, Dick summarized. And someone is willing to kill to keep that secret buried. Davenport barked excitedly. We'll find them. We're the best team in Somerset. We need to infiltrate the Avalon Collective, Dick stated. But how? Pat stroked his beard thoughtfully. I might have an idea. Pat's idea involved a little bit of subterfuge, a lot of charm, and a carefully planted rumor about a wealthy American tourist with a fascination for the occult. Mr. Toad, of course, was delighted to play the part, complete with a ridiculous accent and an even more ridiculous outfit. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Toad, piloted by Sam in a small speedboat, landed on one of the small, uninhabited islands in the estuary. Dick, hidden in the darkness, observed the scene through his infrared sensors. The island was eerily silent, the only sound the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. A faint light flickered from a hidden cove. Toad, his charade surprisingly convincing, approached the cove. He was met by a group of teenagers, hooded and masked. They led him through a winding path towards a clearing, where a bonfire burned brightly. Dick watched as Toad was ushered into the center of the circle. The teenagers began to chant, their voices low and hypnotic. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something else, something acrid and unpleasant. Then, the chanting stopped. A figure stepped forward, their face hidden behind a silver mask. Welcome, Mr. Abernathy, the figure said, their voice distorted by a voice modulator. Tonight, you will witness the true power of Avalon. Dick knew he couldn't wait any longer. He activated his built-in smoke grenade, filling the clearing with a thick, opaque cloud. The teenagers panicked, scattering in all directions. He moved through the chaos, his robotic strength easily overpowering the confused and disoriented youths. He quickly apprehended the masked figure, disarming them. Underneath the mask, pale and sweating, was Spencer. Spencer confessed everything. The Avalon Collective had started as a harmless social club, a way for the wealthy teenagers of Somerset to escape the pressures of their privileged lives. But it had quickly spiraled out of control. Inspired by the Thorne family's past, they began to dabble in occult rituals, believing they could summon spirits and gain power. Bethany, however, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with their activities. She wanted to leave, to expose their secrets. Spencer, desperate to keep the group together and protect his younger brother from exposure, had confronted Bethany at the rave. They argued, and in a fit of rage, he'd pushed her. She'd fallen, hitting her head on a rock. He hadn't meant to kill her, but he panicked. The fire on the tour was an attempt to destroy evidence, to throw the police off the scent. The initiation ceremony was a staged charade, designed to scare off Toad. Dick listened, his processors absorbing every word. He felt no sympathy, no emotion. Justice, he believed, was a cold, calculated equation. The police arrived, sirens wailing, to take Spencer into custody. As they led him away, he looked at Dick, his face filled with despair. It was all a mistake, he whispered. We were just kids. Dick stared blankly. Mistakes have consequences. Back in Glastonbury, the dust began to settle. Lord Thorne, devastated but relieved to have answers, thanked Dick and Pat profusely. He promised a generous donation to the local animal shelter in Davenport's name, much to Davenport's delight. As for Dick Spanner, he found himself back in his cramped office above the bakery, the smell of baking bread a comforting aroma in the aftermath of the case. Pat popped in for a final coffee, his red van parked outside. You did a good job, Dick, he said, his smile genuine. Just another case, Pat, Dick replied, his voice monotone. Another shadow lifted from Somerset. He paused, a flicker of something that might have been emotion crossing his metal face. And you're buying the oil bath. The Avalon Collective was disbanded, its members scattered and disgraced. The Thorne family struggled to come to terms with their tragic loss. Postman Pat continued his rounds, delivering mail and spreading goodwill. Fireman Sam remained vigilant, ready to protect the community from harm. Mr. Toad returned to Toad Hall, regaling his friends with tales of his, slightly embellished, adventure. Portland Bill kept watch from his lighthouse, a silent guardian of the coast. And Davenport, well, Davenport continued to be optimistic, wagging his tail and sniffing out sausages. And Dick Spanner, the robotic private detective, remained in Somerset, a silent sentinel standing between the light and the shadows, waiting for the next case, the next mystery, the next crime to darken the quiet corners of the English countryside.